The morning air hung heavy with dew, glistening on the roses like unshed tears. A sharp, deliberate crunch of heels shattered the silence along my garden path. I froze, pruning shears poised mid-cut. I didn't need to turn to know who dared invade Gavrick's sacred blooms with the audacity of Louboutins. "Elira!" Her voice slithered through the stillness, honey laced with venom. "Still grubbing in the mud, are we?" I forced my hands steady, snipping at the white roses. Gavrick's gift for a wedding that crumbled into divorce papers and betrayal, delivered by the very woman now lurking at my back. "Viora," I said, voice ablade wrapped in calm. "You know why I'm here," she purred, her shadow creeping over the flowerbed like a stain. She reeked of arrogance, a predator's scent I'd learned to loathe, but something in her tone hinted at a game I hadn't yet seen. If you love stories of resilience, reclaiming justice with style, and rediscovering your worth, hit that subscribe button for Graceful Revenge now. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Let's dive into the power of elegant revenge and life's deepest lessons together. "The reading of the will is tomorrow," she continued. "Torrin and I think it's best if we discuss things civilly." I turned around, wiping my soil-covered hands on my gardening apron. "There's nothing to discuss," I said firmly. "This is my father's house, his estate," I added, emphasizing each word. Vera corrected me, her perfectly painted red lips curling into a smirk. "And since Torrin was like a son to Gavrick for 15 years, we believe we're entitled to our fair share." The pruning shears in my hand felt heavier. "The same Torrin who cheated on his daughter with his secretary?" I asked, my voice steady despite the sting of memory. "That Torrin?" "Ancient history." Vyra waved her manicured hand dismissively. "Gavrick forgave him. They still played golf every Sunday until—" She paused for dramatic effect. I knew she was referencing my father's recent death. It was still raw, a wound that hadn't even begun to scab over. He'd been gone just 2 weeks. Here was this woman, this vulture, circling what she thought was easy prey. "My father wouldn't have left Torrin anything," I said, standing to my full height. "He was many things, but he wasn't stupid." Viora's fake smile faltered. "We'll see about that," she replied coolly. "Your brother Zivrin seems to think differently," she added. The mention of my brother sent a chill down my spine. We hadn't spoken since Gavrick's funeral. He'd spent more time consoling Torrin than his own sister. "You've spoken to Zivrin?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Oh, honey." Viora stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We've done more than speak. He's been very helpful." I gripped the pruning shears tighter. Gavrick's words from years ago echoed in my mind. "The roses need a firm hand, Elira, but never a cruel one. Even the sharpest thorns serve a purpose." "Get off my property, Viora," I said quietly, "before I forget my manners." She laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Your property? That's cute. This house is worth millions, Elira." "Did you really think you'd get to keep it all to yourself?" she taunted. "Playing house in your daddy's mansion while the rest of us get nothing?" My father built this house brick by brick. He planted every tree, designed every room. "This isn't about money," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "This is about legacy." "Legacy?" Viora snorted. "Wake up, Elira. Everything is about money, and tomorrow, when that will is read, you're going to learn that the hard way." She turned to leave, but paused at the garden gate. "Oh, and you might want to start packing. Torrin and I will need at least a month to renovate before we move in." As her heels clicked down the path, I looked at the roses. Their white petals were now spotted with soil, where my trembling hands had crushed them. Gavrik always said white roses represented new beginnings. All I could see was red. I pulled out my phone and dialed Lysara. "It's me," I said when she answered. "Viora just paid me a visit. Yeah, she's exactly as bad as we thought. Can you come over?" "There's something about the will I need to discuss with you." My best friend's voice was firm and reassuring. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't worry, Elira. Your father was smarter than they know." As I ended the call, I noticed a small envelope poking out from beneath one of the rose bushes. Its corner was damp with dew, and the handwriting on it was unmistakably Gavrik's. It was addressed to me. I picked it up with shaking hands, wondering how long it had been waiting there, hidden among the thorns. The paper felt heavy. It carried more than just words. "Well, Gavrik," I whispered, turning the envelope over in my hands. "Looks like you left me one last surprise." The sound of Viora's car engine faded into the distance. I stood in the garden, holding what felt like the first piece of a puzzle my father had left behind. Whatever game Viora and Torin were playing, I had a feeling they were about to learn they'd chosen the wrong opponent. Lysara arrived exactly when she promised. Her legal briefcase was in one hand, a bottle of wine in the other. "I figured we might need this," she said, holding up the wine as she walked into Gavrik's study. I was still holding the unopened envelope, perched on the edge of my father's leather chair. The room smelled of his pipe tobacco and old books, a scent I wasn't ready to lose to Viora's promised renovations. "You haven't opened it yet?" Lysara nodded at the envelope, setting her briefcase down with a heavy thunk. "I wanted to wait for you," I said, turning the envelope over again. After what Viora said about Zevran helping them, I wasn't sure. "Open it," Lysara insisted, pouring 2 generous glasses of wine. "Your father was very specific about certain things being revealed at certain times." My head snapped up. "What do you mean?" She handed me a glass. "Open the letter, Elira." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small key. "Dear Elira," I read aloud, Gavrik's voice echoing in my head. "If you're reading this, then someone has already made a move on the estate. Knowing human nature as I do, I'm guessing it's Viora. She always did remind me of a shark, all teeth and no soul." Lysara snorted into her wineglass. I continued reading. "The key enclosed opens the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside, you'll find everything you need to protect what's yours. Remember what I taught you about chess. Sometimes you have to sacrifice a pawn to protect the queen. Love, Gavrik." I looked up at Lysara, who was already moving toward the desk. "You knew about this?" I asked. "I helped him set it up," she admitted, gesturing for me to use the key. "Your father came to me 6 months ago, right after his diagnosis. He knew exactly how things would play out." The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside was a thick manila envelope and a USB drive. "Before you look at those," Lysara said, sitting on the edge of the desk, "there's something you need to know about tomorrow's will reading. Your father added a codicil 3 days before he died." "A what?" I asked, frowning. "A modification to the will," she explained. "And trust me, it's going to change everything." I spread the contents of the manila envelope across the desk. Photos spilled out, dozens of them. Viora meeting with someone in a dark parking lot. Torin entering a lawyer's office that wasn't Lysara's. Bank statements, email printouts. Gavrik had them investigated? I asked, stunned. Better. Lysara's smile was sharp. He had them followed. That USB drive contains video footage of Viora attempting to bribe your father's nurse for information about his will 2 days before he died. My hand shook as I picked up one of the photos. "Is that Zevran meeting with Viora?" I asked, pointing to a grainy image. 3 weeks before your father's death," Lysara confirmed. "But look at his face in the next photo." The second photo showed my brother leaving the meeting. His expression was twisted with disgust, and he was holding what looked like a check. "He kept the check as evidence," Lysara explained. "Brought it straight to your father. That's when Gavrik knew he had to act fast." "But Viora said Zevran was helping them," I protested, confused. "Your brother's been playing a dangerous game, Elira," Lysara said, "feeding them just enough information to keep them confident, all while helping your father gather evidence of their conspiracy." I sank back into the chair. My mind was spinning. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked. "Because Viora needed to show her hand first," Lysara replied, pulling out some papers from her briefcase. "Tomorrow, when I read the will, Viora and Torin are going to think they've won. The initial reading will grant them a significant portion of the estate." "What?" I stood up so fast my wine glass tipped over, staining the carpet red. "Let me finish." Lysara held up her hand. "That's when the codicil kicks in. Your father set up a trap, Elira. The moment they accept the inheritance, they trigger a clause that reveals their attempted manipulation and fraud. Everything, the photos, the videos, the bribes, becomes public record." I stared at the evidence spread across the desk. Understanding dawned. "He made them think they won so they'd incriminate themselves," I said slowly. "Exactly." Lysara's grin was triumphant. "The real will leaves everything to you, with a trust set up for Zevran. Vera and Torin get nothing except a very public exposure of their true characters." "And tomorrow?" I asked, still processing. "Tomorrow," Lysara finished her wine, "we watch them walk right into the trap they set for themselves. Your father's last lesson about consequences." I picked up his letter again, running my fingers over his familiar handwriting. Even from beyond the grave, he was protecting me, teaching me, helping me fight back. "One more thing," Lysara said softly. "Zevran asked to see you tonight. He has something else you need to know before tomorrow." I looked out the study window at the setting sun, thinking of my brother, of Viora's smug face in the garden, of all the pieces my father had carefully put in place. "Tell him to come over," I said. "It's time we had a family reunion." Zevran arrived after dark. He looked nothing like the confident brother who'd stood beside Torin at the funeral. His designer suit was wrinkled. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. He hesitated at the study doorway, clutching a leather portfolio like a shield. "You look terrible," I said, breaking the ice. "Yeah, well, playing double agent isn't as fun as the movies make it seem," he replied, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can I come in?" I gestured to the chair across from me. Lysara had left an hour ago, but the evidence of our earlier discovery still littered Gavrik's desk. "I see you found Gavrik's insurance policy," Zevran said, nodding at the photos. "Why didn't you tell me what you were doing?" The question came out sharper than I intended. He slumped into the chair. "Because I needed to make it right. After everything with Torin, the way I treated you during the divorce. I was an idiot, Elira." "You were my brother," I corrected. "You were supposed to be on my side." "I know." He opened the portfolio and pulled out a check. "This is what Viora offered me to testify that Gavrik wasn't of sound mind when he made his final will. $500,000 to betray my own sister." I stared at the check, then at my brother. "But you didn't cash it," I said. "No." Zevran's voice cracked. "I took it straight to Gavrik. You should have seen his face, Elira. Not angry, just disappointed. That's when he told me about his plan. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 9 times. Each dong echoed through the tense silence. "There's more," Zivran continued, pulling out a phone. "I recorded everything, every meeting, every offer, every threat. Viora's been planning this for months, even before Gavrik got sick." He pressed play. Viora's voice filled the room. "Once the old man kicks it, we'll contest the will with your testimony about his mental state and Torin's long relationship with him. We'll get everything. Elira won't know what hit her." My hands clenched into fists. "When was this?" I asked. 2 months ago," Zevran replied. "But wait, there's worse." He fast-forwarded the recording. Torin's voice came next. "We'll sell the house, liquidate the assets. Elira can go back to her little apartment and her pathetic gardening business. She never deserved any of this anyway." "Turn it off," I whispered. Zevran complied, then pulled out one final document. "This is why I came tonight," he said. "Viora didn't just want the money, Elira. She wanted revenge on you." "Revenge for what?" I asked, frowning. "For making Torin feel guilty, for making him pay alimony, for—" He paused. "For making him look bad when you caught them together." The memory hit me like a physical blow. I'd walked into my own bedroom, finding them there. Viora's triumphant smile as my marriage crumbled. "She was his secretary for 3 years," Zevran continued. "She planned everything, worked her way into his life, into Gavrik's social circle. This document proves she started embezzling from Gavrik's company 6 months before you caught them." I snatched the paper, scanning the bank transfers and account numbers. "Gavrik knew about this?" I asked. "Found out right before his diagnosis," Zevran said. "He was building a case against her, but the cancer—" His voice trailed off. "That's when he started planning this instead," I murmured. "Said sometimes justice needs a different path." "The codicil," Zevran nodded. "Tomorrow's going to be brutal, Elira. They think they've got it all figured out. Viora's even hired a camera crew to document the historic moment when they take possession of the estate." Despite everything, I laughed. She hired cameras to record her own downfall. Gavrik would have appreciated the irony. Zevran smiled. A real one this time. "Listen, I know I can't fix the past 3 years with one night of revelations, but I want you to know I'm here now. Whatever happens tomorrow, I've got your back." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Gavrik's garden, silvered by moonlight. "Remember when we were kids and Gavrik caught us fighting over that toy car? The red Corvette?" Zevran joined me at the window. "He made us wash every window in the house, said we needed to learn to see things clearly." I turned to face my brother. "I see clearly now, Zevran. I see what Gavrik was trying to teach us, even at the end." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Sometimes the biggest victory isn't in winning. It's in letting your enemies defeat themselves," I finished. The grandfather clock chimed 1/4 past, reminding us that tomorrow was getting closer with each tick. "You should get some rest," Zevran said, gathering his evidence. "Tomorrow's going to be one hell of a show." As I watched him leave, I touched the window pane, cool and solid under my fingers. Gavrik had always loved these windows, said they were the eyes of the house, watching over his family. Tomorrow, they would witness justice served exactly the way he had planned it. I felt a quiet resolve settle over me. The morning of the will reading dawned bright and clear. I was in Gavrik's study again, this time watching Lysara arrange papers on the massive oak desk while camera equipment was set up around the room. "Viora's camera crew is here," Zevran announced, slipping through the door. "You should see her out there, practicing her gracious acceptance speech." Everything ready? I asked Lysera. She patted her briefcase. All set. The codicil is sealed in this envelope, along with copies of all the evidence, once they accept the initial terms. A commotion in the hallway cut her off. Viora's voice carried through the door, high and excited. This is where we'll put the new chandelier. The old one is so dated. Places, everyone, Lysera muttered, straightening her suit jacket. Let the show begin. Viora swept in first, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Torin followed, looking uncomfortable in his tailored suit. The camera crew trailed behind them, adjusting lights and checking angles. Elira! Torin nodded stiffly. It was the first time he'd spoken to me directly since the divorce. Let's begin, Lysera announced, taking her place behind Gavrick's desk. As Gavrick's attorney, I'll be reading his last will and testament, along with any additional documents he prepared before his passing. Viora practically bounced in her seat. We're ready, she chirped. The initial reading went exactly as Lysera had warned me. Gavrick's estate, including the house and company shares, was to be divided. 60% to me, 40% to Torin and Viora. W knew it, Viora squealed, grabbing Torin's arm. Gavrick loved us too much to leave us out. However, Lysera continued, her voice cutting through Viora's celebration, there is a codicil to the will, added 3 days before Gavrick's death. Viora's smile faltered. A what? She asked. A modification, Torin explained, suddenly looking nervous. What kind of modification? Lysera broke the seal on the envelope. The acceptance of any inheritance under this will is contingent upon a full investigation into certain financial irregularities discovered in the months preceding Gavrick's death. The room went silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. What irregularities? Viora's voice had lost its triumphant edge. Perhaps these will explain, Lysera said, sliding the photos across the desk. Or this USB drive containing footage of attempted bribery. Or these bank statements showing systematic embezzlement from Gavrick's company. Torin grabbed one of the photos. His face drained of color. Where did you get these? He stammered. Gavrick had quite the collection of evidence, Zevran spoke up from his corner, including recordings of you both planning to contest the will based on false testimony about his mental state. Vera stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. Turn those cameras off now, she hissed. Oh no, I said, standing to face her. The cameras stay. You wanted to document this historic moment, remember? You can't do this, she spat. Torin, tell them they can't do this. But Torin was still staring at the photos, particularly one showing him entering a competitor's office with confidential company documents. The codicil is quite clear, Lysera continued, professional as ever. Any attempt to claim an inheritance automatically triggers the release of all this evidence to the proper authorities. The choice is yours. Choice? Viora laughed hysterically. What choice? You've trapped us. No, I corrected her. You trapped yourselves. Every scheme, every plot, every attempt to steal what wasn't yours, it all led to this moment. This is your fault, she whirled on Zevran. You were supposed to help us. Zevran shrugged. I did help, just not you. Torin, she pleaded. Do something. But Torin was already standing, straightening his tie with shaking hands. It's over, Viora. We've lost. The hell it is, she snapped. I won't let that win. That is my daughter. Gavrick's voice filled the room. Everyone froze as Lysera pressed play on a video file. Gavrick's face appeared on one of the camera crew's monitors, thin but determined. recorded just days before his death. And if you're watching this, it means you've shown your true colors, just as I knew you would. Greed is a terrible teacher, but consequences are excellent students. Viora's mascara ran in black streaks as she backed toward the door. "This isn't over," she shouted. "Actually," Lysera said, "it is. The police are waiting in the foyer to discuss the evidence of embezzlement. I'd suggest cooperating. It might help with sentencing." As Viora and Torin were led away, the cameras still rolling, I felt Gavrick's presence in every corner of the room. He'd orchestrated it all, not just to protect his legacy, but to teach one final lesson about justice and patience. "Well," Zevran said into the silence, "I guess those cameras caught their historic moment after all." The media circus that followed was exactly what Viora had wanted, just not in the way she'd planned. By evening, local news vans lined the street, and my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from reporters. "You need to see this," Zevran said, turning up the volume on Gavrick's old television in the study. Viora's arrest was playing on every channel. Her mascara-streaked face, a stark contrast to her designer dress, as officers led her to a police car. The investigation into Gavrick's company has uncovered multiple instances of fraud, the reporter's voice droned on. "Turn it off," I said, rubbing my temples. "I can't watch anymore." Lysera burst through the door, waving her phone. "It gets better. The DA just called. They found offshore accounts, dummy corporations, everything. Viora wasn't just stealing from your father's company. She was running a whole network of fraud schemes." "And Torin?" I asked, not sure why I still cared about my ex-husband's fate. "Singing like a canary," Zevran replied. "Turns out he's not so loyal when facing serious prison time." A sharp knock at the study door made us all jump. A police detective entered, looking apologetic. "Elira," he said, "we need to discuss some additional evidence we've uncovered." "More?" I gestured for him to sit. "What now?" "We found documents in Viora's apartment suggesting this wasn't her first attempt at this type of scheme," he explained. "There are at least 3 other cases of her targeting wealthy families, though she never succeeded on this scale before." Lysera leaned forward. "Other families?" "Yes," the detective replied. "She would typically work her way into their lives through employment or social connections, then orchestrate situations to gain access to their assets." He pulled out a folder. "Sound familiar?" "The secretary position," I whispered. "It wasn't random." "No, it wasn't," the detective confirmed. "She specifically targeted your ex-husband because of his connection to your father's company. The affair was just her way in." My stomach turned. 3 years of blame and self-doubt about my failed marriage suddenly shifted perspective. "There's something else," the detective continued. "We found this in her personal files. It appears to be a detailed plan for after she gained control of the estate." He handed me a document that made my blood run cold. Detailed notes about accidents that could befall me after the transfer of property. Plans to frame Zevran for financial misconduct. Even sketches of how she wanted to remodel the house, starting with destroying Gavrick's garden. "She would have killed me," I said flatly. "She never would have gotten the chance," Zevran growled, gripping the arm of his chair. The detective nodded grimly. "This evidence upgrades the charges significantly. Combined with the fraud charges and attempted bribery, she's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum." After he left, we sat in stunned silence until Lysera's phone buzzed again. "It's my contact at the DA's office," she said, reading the message. "Torin just finished his statement. He's admitted to everything. including helping Viora access confidential company files before Gavrick's death. Did he know? I had to ask. About her plans for me? No, Zevran answered, scanning the documents. According to this, she kept that part to herself. Probably knew he wouldn't have the stomach for it. A thought struck me. Gavrick knew, didn't he? That's why he put all this in motion. Lysera nodded slowly. He suspected. That's why he hired the private investigators. Why he documented everything. He wasn't just protecting his legacy. He was protecting you. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden, now swarming with news crews. The roses still bloomed, oblivious to the chaos their previous admirer had planned. We should release a statement, Zevran suggested. Control the narrative before Viora's lawyers try to spin this. Already drafted. Lysera pulled out her laptop. A simple statement about cooperating with authorities and requesting privacy during this difficult time. Professional, dignified, everything Viora wasn't. Gavrick would like that, I said, managing a small smile. There's one more thing, Zevran said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. I found this in Gavrick's personal safe. It's marked, "After justice is served." My hands shook as I opened it, recognizing Gavrick's handwriting once again. My dear Elira, it read, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally come to light. Don't let this experience harden your heart. The garden still needs tending, and life still needs living. I didn't set this trap just for justice. I did it so you could be free. Free from doubt, free from fear, and free to bloom again. Love, Gavrick. Outside, the reporters continued their live broadcasts, telling the world about the scandal, the arrests, the betrayal. But inside the study, surrounded by the evidence of my father's love and foresight, I finally felt something I hadn't experienced since finding Torin with Viora 3 years ago. Peace. So, Zevran said, breaking the silence, what now? I looked at the roses outside, then at my brother and best friend. Now we rebuild, together. The preliminary hearing came faster than any of us expected. 1 month after the will reading, I found myself sitting in a courtroom, watching Viora and Torin being led in wearing orange jumpsuits, a far cry from their designer clothes. All rise, the bailiff called out. Lysera squeezed my hand as we stood. She'd insisted on being both my lawyer and moral support. Some moments require both legal expertise and friendship, she'd said. You don't have to speak today, she whispered. The evidence speaks for itself. But I knew I had to. Gavrick's last letter had said not to let this harden my heart, and staying silent felt too much like fear. Viora's eyes locked onto mine as she passed our bench. The hatred in them was palpable, but something else flickered there too. Desperation. Her lawyer had been trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wasn't budging. Not with the mountain of evidence against her. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, the state would like to enter into evidence Exhibits A through F, documenting a pattern of systematic fraud and conspiracy spanning 3 years. I watched as they displayed the photos, the bank statements, the recordings. Vira's face grew paler with each new piece of evidence. Torin just stared at his hands, shoulders slumped in defeat. The state calls Elira to the stand, the prosecutor announced. Walking to the witness box felt like crossing an ocean. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, the journalists scribbling in their notebooks, the jury leaning forward in anticipation, Viora's gaze burning into my back. Please state your name for the record, the clerk said. Elira, I replied. Can you tell us about your relationship with the defendants? The prosecutor asked. I took a deep breath, looking straight at Viora. Torin was my husband for 15 years. Viora was his secretary and the woman he had an affair with. After our divorce, they married 6 months later, then started visiting my father, building a relationship with him while he was sick. Objection, Viora's lawyer stood. Relevance? Goes to motive, Your Honor, the prosecutor countered. Shows the systematic nature of their plan. Overruled, the judge said. Continue. I described everything. The visits, the manipulation, Viora's threats in the garden, the evidence Gavrik had collected. With each word, I could see Viora's carefully constructed facade crumbling. Elira, the prosecutor held up the documents found in Viora's apartment. When did you become aware of these plans regarding your safety? Objection! Viora's lawyer practically shouted. Those documents are circumstantial. Your Honor, these documents detail specific plans to harm the witness after gaining control of the estate, the prosecutor replied. The judge peered at Viora over his glasses. Overruled, he said. I learned about them after their arrest, I answered, my voice steady. My father suspected something like this might happen. That's why he gathered all the evidence, why he changed his will. He was protecting me, even after he was gone. Viora suddenly stood up, her handcuffs rattling. He was a manipulative old man who couldn't stand to see his precious daughter lose anything. This whole thing is a setup. Viora, sit down, the judge ordered. You think you've won? Viora shouted at me. You think this is over? I made your husband leave you once. I destroyed your marriage, and I'll find a way to destroy everything else, too. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Bailiffs rushed to restrain Viora as she continued screaming threats. Torin looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Order! The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Remove the defendant. As they dragged Viora away, still shouting, I caught Zevran's eye in the gallery. He gave me a subtle nod. Everything she'd just said had been caught on the court record, destroying any chance of sympathy from the jury. The judge called a recess, and Lysara hurried me out of the courtroom. In the hallway, reporters clamored for comments, but she expertly steered me past them. Well, she said once we were safely in a private room, I'd say that outburst just sealed their fate. Did you see Torin's face? Zevran joined us, closing the door on the media circus outside. He finally saw her for what she really is. I sank into a chair. Exhaustion hit me all at once. Gavrik knew, I said. He knew exactly how she'd react when cornered, because people like that can't stand losing control. Lysara pulled out her phone. The DA is texting me already. They want to move forward with additional charges based on her threats in court. How much time is she looking at now? I asked. 25 to 30 years minimum, Lysara replied. Torin might get less with his cooperation, but he's still looking at 10 to 15. I thought about Gavrik's roses, still blooming in the garden he'd loved. He always said the truth finds its way to the light eventually. Speaking of truth, Zevran said, there's something else you need to know about Gavrik's evidence, something we found in his personal safe this morning. Back in Gavrik's study, Zevran pulled out a weathered leather journal. The police found this when they were doing their final sweep of Viora's apartment. It was hidden in a false bottom of her desk drawer. What is it? I reached for the journal, but Zevran held it back. Before you read this, you need to understand. Gavrik knew about this journal. It's why he was so certain about Viora's intentions. Lysara leaned forward. Is this what I think it is? Her playbook, Zevran confirmed. Detailed accounts of every family she's targeted, every scheme she's run, including her original plans for us. He opened the journal to a marked page and began reading. This family presents the perfect opportunity. wealthy patriarch, strained family relationships, naive daughter who trusts too easily. The husband is the weak link, easily manipulated with flattery and attention. My stomach turned. "Stop," I said, but Zevran shook his head. "You need to hear this, Elira," he continued. Phase 1, complete marriage destroyed. Phase 2, isolate the daughter from her support system. Phase 3, gain the father's trust. Final phase, eliminate all obstacles permanently. That's when Gavrik confronted her, isn't it? I asked, remembering Gavrik's sudden insistence on updating his will. Lysara nodded. He showed me this journal 3 months ago. That's when we started building the case against her. But there's more, Zevran said, flipping to another section. She wasn't working alone. There's a whole network of people involved in these schemes. Names, dates, bank accounts, everything. A sharp knock interrupted us. The detective from earlier entered, looking grimmer than before. "We've been going through Viora's contacts," he announced. "Found something interesting about her past. She's not who she claims to be." He laid out a series of documents on Gavrik's desk. Birth certificates, passports, driver's licenses, all with different names, but the same face. "Her real name is Neris," he said. "She's wanted in 3 states for similar schemes. The FBI has been looking for her for years." Neris! The name hit me like a physical blow. The woman who was convicted of killing that businessman in Florida. His death was ruled an accident, the detective corrected. But yes, same person. She served 5 years for fraud, got out, changed her identity, and started over. Your father was her biggest target yet. Lysara was already on her phone. "I'm calling the DA. This changes everything. With these priors, she's looking at life in prison." "There's something else," the detective added. "We found this in her safety deposit box." He handed me a USB drive. "It's footage of your father confronting her about the journal. Thought you might want to see it." With shaking hands, I plugged the drive into Gavrik's computer. His face filled the screen, sitting in this very study, looking directly at Viora. "I know what you're planning." Gavrik's voice was steel. "I've read your little journal. Quite the career you've had, Neris." Viora's face on the screen went white. "How did you really think I wouldn't investigate the woman trying to destroy my family?" Gavrik cut her off. "I've known who you are since the day you started working for my company." "Then why did you let me continue?" she stammered. "Because sometimes the best way to catch a snake is to let it think it's winning." Gavrik leaned forward. "You're finished, Neris. Everything you've done, everyone you've hurt. It ends here." "You're dying," Vira Neris spat. "You can't stop me." Gavrik's laugh was cold. "My dear, I already have. You just don't know it yet." The video ended, leaving us in stunned silence. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew everything right from the start." "And he built an airtight case," Lysara added. "One that would protect you and expose her entire network." The detective gathered his documents. "The FBI wants to talk to you tomorrow. With this journal and your father's evidence, we can take down her whole organization." After he left, I walked to Gavrik's chair, running my hand along the worn leather. He let her think she was winning, all while making sure she'd never hurt anyone again. "Classic Gavrik," Zevran smiled. "Always playing the long game?" Lysara's phone buzzed. "The DA just approved the new charges. They're upgrading it to a federal case. Viora, or Neris, will never see the outside of a prison again." I picked up Gavrik's journal from his desk, the one he'd kept all his life, and opened it to his last entry. "Sometimes justice takes patience. Sometimes it takes sacrifice. But most importantly, it takes faith in the truth. Elira will understand when the time comes. The garden will bloom again, stronger than before. The preliminary hearing resumes tomorrow, Lysera said softly. Are you ready to finish this? I looked at the evidence spread across the desk, at Gavrick's journal, at the garden beyond the window where all this began. Yes, I said. It's time to end this, for Gavrick, for everyone she's ever hurt, and for you. Zevran added, mostly for you. The gavel's final crack echoed through the courtroom like thunder. In light of the overwhelming evidence and the additional federal charges, this court sentences Neris, also known as Viora, to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Viora, Neris, stood rigid in her orange jumpsuit. All traces of her former polished facade were gone. When they led her past our bench, she stopped, turning to face me one last time. I hope you're happy, she hissed. You've ruined everything. No, I replied calmly. You did that yourself. The only difference is that this time, your target fought back. The bailiff pulled her away as she tried to respond. Behind her, Torn was already being led out to begin his own 15-year sentence. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us, but Lysera's firm voice cut through the chaos. My client has no comment except to say that justice has been served, not just for her family, but for all the families affected by these crimes. Back at the house, Zevran was waiting with a surprise. The FBI finished processing Gavrick's study. They found this hidden in his desk. He handed me a small box. Inside was a single key and a note. For when justice blooms, check the greenhouse. The greenhouse had always been Gavrick's private sanctuary, a place he retreated to when he needed to think. I hadn't been inside since his death. Want us to come with you? Lysera asked. I shook my head. I need to do this alone. The greenhouse key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the scent of blooming flowers. Gavrick's prized orchids still thrived, clearly tended by someone, probably Zevran, during these past months. In the center of the greenhouse stood Gavrick's workbench. On it was a large envelope with my name on it. Inside was a deed and another letter. My dearest Elira, it began. By now, justice has been served, and the truth has come to light. But justice wasn't the only thing I wanted to cultivate in this greenhouse. I grew more than flowers. I grew hope. Hope for you to find your strength again, to bloom despite the shadows others cast. The deed in this envelope is for the vacant lot next to your old flower shop. I bought it the day after I confronted Neris. It's time for Elira's gardens to grow beyond our home. Your talent for bringing beauty into the world shouldn't be limited to one garden. Remember what I taught you. Some flowers bloom best after a frost. You've weathered your winter, Elira. Now it's time to bloom again. Love always, Gavrick. I walked back to the house in a daze, clutching the deed and letter. Zevran and Lysera were waiting in the kitchen. Well? Zevran asked. I spread the deed on the counter. He bought me the lot next to my old shop, I said. He wanted me to expand the business. That's not all he did. Lysera pulled out her tablet. The Elira's Gardens trademark was registered 6 months ago. He set up everything. Business plans, permits, funding. All it needs is you.